Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And today's panel discussion is perhaps one of the most relevant and timely sessions that I've definitely seen in this conference. And the topic is awakening our support of Black leaders. As we all know, the entire world, and especially the US, is still reeling from the pandemic. We have a lot going on in terms of protests that continue to highlight the country's longstanding struggles with race, privilege, and prejudice. And a lot of us, we're dealing with a lot of different emotions, ranging from anger, grief, fear, to hopelessness. So since we tend to bring our whole selves to work, what is it that we as employees and leaders need to do in terms of handling those emotions, because we can't just leave them at the front door come Monday morning. So leaders have, they carry their own feelings, and then they have a huge role to play in how they help their people manage their emotions and still continue to do the work that they've signed up to. So what can organizations do to support and stand in solidarity with their Black leaders and foster an environment that encourages dialogue and reflection? What have we learned in the past several months, and what are we doing about it? So to lead this discussion and introduce this discussion, we have with us our panel here, consisting of Brian Underhill, Zia Best, Charles Story, and Lisa Tatum. Welcome, all of you. And I'd like to quickly introduce Brian. Brian Underhill is the founder and CEO of Coachsource, and he's an industry recognized expert in the design and management of worldwide executive coaching implementations. And he's also a very well-known author and speaker. And he spent 10 years managing executive coaching operations for Marshall Goldsmith. The other fun fact from a Coacharya perspective is that our co-founder, Ram, and Brian go back a long way, and Ram is also part of the Coachsource family as well. So so we're really excited to have you here, Brian. So with that, I'd like to pass it off to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Ram and I go back a long time, and we are honored that he invited us to be part of this very worthy conference. And so, yes, I'm Brian. I'm the CEO of Coachsource, and we are the world's largest executive coaching firm with 1,100 coaches around the world. And even with that, normally we're talking about coaching topics and so forth, but this topic is very near and dear to our hearts, and something we did back in June at Coachsource. We did a similar webinar, and we wanted the opportunity to bring this same discussion, the same conversation to more forums, and so we were really thrilled to be able to join this conference today. As you heard, of course, we've had a tumultuous spring and summer in the United States. Of course, much of the world has. So when it comes to COVID, here in the States, at least, the statistics are showing that Black and Latino people are more than 5 times likely to die from COVID than white people. Of course, in May, we had this outrageous act that had worldwide attention with a Black man, George Floyd, being killed at the knee of a white police officer. And something about that incident for perhaps many of us, not for my Black colleagues, but for some of us white folks, I think really awakened our nation to a whole new level of the injustices that have been going on forever and for a very long time. The protests that took place, you may have seen on TV and so forth, were multicultural. I was very excited that my own kids, who are sort of suburban, middle-class kids, were very moved and were out on the streets as well. And I joined them, but from a safe distance. Too, something about this was just different for much of our country. There are many other incidents that we've had too. people like Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. You may not have heard all of their stories, but they're pretty difficult to digest. And so one of the very important ways that we can move forward is through conversation and discussion. And this one here today is intended exactly to do that, awakening our support of Black leaders. We've brought an amazing panel together. I'll first introduce our own panelist, and then she'll introduce the other two. So leading this conversation is our own Zia Best from CoachSource. She's been with us a number of years. She's an account service manager and a very vital part of our organization, and she has to oversee coaching activities at 40 or 50 of our clients, which is a lot to keep track of, and interact with all of our coaches and our clients and make sure everything's going as it's supposed to. Zia has a passion for diversity and inclusion because one of her past jobs was a diversity and inclusion administrator. She's had HR roles, communication roles, and we last found her just after she finished her last job at Princeton University. And she is in New Jersey on the East Coast. So we're really thrilled to have her here to run our panel today. So Zia, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce the others.
Thank you so much, Brian, for the warm introduction. And I think Brian nailed it. This Awake, Aware, Arise conference really spoke to us as a way for us to start a conversation about how we address some of the inequality, injustice, and indignity that is so present in our society, but in many societies. And so I am so honored and privileged to be able to first introduce a fellow New Jerseyan, Lisa Skeet Tatum, who is the CEO and founder of Landed. Landed is a personalized career pathing platform created to increase the success and engagement of women and diverse groups in the workplace. Lisa comes to us with a breadth of background and experience. She was a general partner for over a decade at Cardinal Partners, also had stints working with Procter & Gamble, GE Capital, and founded her very own consulting practice. Here at CoachSource, we partner with Lisa all the time, working with her landed coaches and her turnkey platform that really is revolutionizing the coaching field. So thank you, Lisa. Welcome. And now, since I have introduced my fellow New Jerseyan, I will have to go down to Nashville, Tennessee to introduce Charles Story, who is the president of ECS, which is Exceptional Coaching Solutions Group. ECS provides coaching solutions to businesses that want to develop and retain a strong base of executive talent. He has over 35 years of experience, and some of that includes 13 years as the CEO of Inroads, which is one of the largest career and leadership development organizations in the country. He's also a CoachSource coach, so we're super honored to have him working with us and helping to really improve the work lives of leaders all around the country. And so thank you to both Charles and Lisa for joining us. As Brian mentioned, actually, we started this conversation in June of this year, actually on Juneteenth, right? A date of much significance for folks who are Black in America. It was truly the day that we received the news that we were also free as a result of the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation. And so we really wanted to spark a conversation that we knew, even in June, would be an ongoing conversation. But I don't necessarily know that we knew that we might still be in very much the same place. And so I'd like to open this conversation by starting with our panelists and asking them one simple question. You know, what is the issue? I asked this question back in June. What are Black leaders facing and why do they need support? So I'd like to ask this question to Charles, and then Lisa, if you wouldn't mind jumping in with your perspective as well.
Well, Zia, thank you for having us today. I'm honored and look forward to this discussion. When you asked me that question in terms of consideration the other day, certain words just jumped out at me from an individual perspective and from what I'm observing in the broader society. Black leaders, in my mind, are experiencing trepidation, anger, fear, loneliness, frustration, hopelessness, internal stress, and exhaustion, quite frankly. I could go on and on, but those are the ones that those are the descriptors that came most readily to my mind. I'm experiencing that too. I'm older than a lot of the folks on this call, so I've been around and seen a lot and experienced a lot. And this whole thing about living while Black is real. A couple of years ago, I was driving down the street. It had just begun to rain, and I got pulled over. I wasn't speeding, anything like that. And when I asked the officer what the problem was, he said I didn't have my headlights on. And I said, well, officer, it's broad daylight. Why should I have my headlights on? And so I was very respectful, and he asked me for my license and registration and all that, and I had it for him, and he checked my record. And after about 10 minutes, he let me go. So this is real. In the old days, we used to talk about driving while Black. If you are an African American or Black in this country now, you talk about living while Black. When you look at what happened to Breonna Taylor in Louisville, she was in her bed and got killed. When you look at Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia, he was jogging, was killed. You look at what happened to the young man in Aurora, Colorado. He was just walking home from the convenience store, and someone called the police to say that a suspicious character was walking down the street. He ends up dead. So I could go on and on, but the fact of the matter is, you know, the Black community right now and Black leaders are traumatized. I guess that's another word I would use. They're traumatized. But at the same time, we still have to produce. You know, we may be traumatized, but we have to show up and go to work every day. And we have to be as productive as we were last week or the week before or the year before. That's the expectations of us have not changed, even though we are traumatized. So that's what I would say to that question.
Amen to that, Charles. So first I'll say thank you, Zia and Brian, for allowing us to participate. And it's a privilege to be on this panel with Charles. And as was articulated, you know, this is a moment unlike any other in our history, right? You have 20 million people standing up and participating, not just here in the US, not just Black and brown folks, but others who are united. You know, this is a humanity issue, right? This is not a Black issue or a brown issue. It is people, you know, being woke, if you will, to the inequities that we all live on a daily basis, as Charles said. And those feelings are real, as he mentioned, the grief, the exhaustion, the crushing weight of fear, right? Especially if you're in an organization where you may be the only one. And there are costs that come with that in terms of how you show up, especially if you don't have the power. But I would say that people are also activated, and they're probably shocked that people are so shocked. But I don't know anyone of color who hasn't had outreach of some kind. And so people keep saying, well, gosh, well, what do you want, right? What are Black people looking for? Well, it's the same thing that everybody else wants. We want to be heard, valued, safe, and supported. And you want to believe that opportunity actually exists. Because sometimes if you don't see it, and you certainly don't feel it, then you can't believe it. And what's interesting to me as I've been looking at different people's responses is it's kind of what's happening out there, and not really an acknowledgement of what may be happening in your own community or in your own company. And so, you know, I see, and we advise a lot of folks who are like, you know, we're gonna get in the community. And yes, you have to get in the community, but also what's happening to, you know, Black and brown folks within your company, right? The not so microaggressions, the sidelining, the exclusion, being passed over. And then you put, as Charles said, on top of that, the burdens outside of work. I have 2 young boys. Even though my son is at Harvard, he's a freshman. Every time he gets in the car, I am afraid. Every time my 17-year-old gets his keys, I love you, make good decisions, keep your driver's license on the dashboard, kind of thing. So you have this fear for family. You have this living with the daily assumption of guilt and being seen or not, or unseen and not served. I think what's interesting is you also have others who not everyone gets it. Right. So we know that sometimes our non-people of color, they're feeling guilt and shame and wokeness, but some people are feeling put upon. But it is a moment of hope, because I think the willingness and the activation and the allyship is also real, but the exhaustion and the fear is also a reality for so many of us.
I think both of you really hit on very poignant points. Charles mentioning the story and the experience that many Black and Brown folks here in America feel when they see the sirens and hear the lights pull up behind them, regardless of whether you've done anything wrong. There's a fear, there's a little lump that you swallow. I too have faced that fear with my son in the car, right? And having to be very conscious of how I act in that moment, because it's a teaching moment for our children as well, and a learning moment. And so I'm grateful that it happened to be a good experience, but that lump in my chest was still there. And I think that, as you mentioned, Lisa, people still have to be present, right? And show up. And what if they're also dealing with the pandemic of COVID-19? So many people that I know have been affected by the virus and have passed away, possibly more than some of my white counterparts even. And that's really difficult. And so folks have all of these feelings and emotions and these things happening kind of, simultaneously, and then they're asked to show up. What are some of those things that companies and organizations can look for to see that they need to support their Black leaders different? How might it manifest itself from a work experience? Lisa, if you would start that off, I would love it.
Yeah, so one of the things that we advise folks is to look at the numbers without excuses. So many times, companies, they have a lot of focus on intake, and great companies will always attract great people. But the bigger question is what happens when they get there? Do they stay? Do they thrive? Do they progress? And so many organizations, as they look at the pipeline, there is a dramatic thinning out. But there's a tendency to say, well, we had this person, but such and such happened. We had this, but such and such happened. And so our advice is no excuses. And so if your numbers don't reflect your values, then you have to put your actions in place in order to address that. But as people are going through this learning curve, they have to be careful of not burdening their Black people with their full education, right? Because you want to hear, you want to understand the experience, but some things you got to learn on your own. And so, and you can't keep putting, as Charles said, the burden is high. You can't keep putting all the responsibility on the Black people to fix it, right? Because they're already carrying an extra load. And so you have to look at, do you have representation throughout? Are you equitably investing and providing access, which is why I love our partnership, because too often the investment is uneven at best. And so you have to look and have the same intentionality and investing in your people of color as you do everyone else. And it's not a DEI over here, right? It has to be woven through everything that is evaluated, everything that is valued, and how you think about your policies, not just in a box over there, I check it, I got my DEI done, because it doesn't work.
Charles, I think she hit on some very important points and also reaffirmed what you mentioned before. How do you see itself manifesting itself, especially because you have had positions really charged with retaining, high quality talent?
Yeah, I would agree with everything Lisa said. I think that, and I've heard this said a lot more in the last few weeks. You have to, the main thing is the main thing. Okay, and what I mean by that is organizations have to analyze their cultures. Okay, you can have all the pipeline strategies, all the retention strategies, all the succession strategies in the world, but if a company has not analyzed or it's assessed itself and its readiness for diversity and inclusion, all of those strategies will fail. The pipeline will fail, the retention piece will fail, the succession piece will fail. So I emphasize a lot to clients. In fact, I just got a contract to work with a client on improving their diversity and inclusion. And the first thing I said to the founder of this company is that, look, we can't do this unless you guys are ready to do a cultural audit or cultural assessment, because you have to be ready to, if you want to bring more people into your organization, you have to be ready to accept them. You have to be ready to be accepting. You have to be ready to look at them fairly. You have to be ready to give them equal opportunities. You have to give them an opportunity to contribute. You have to give them an opportunity to be productive. So the main thing in my mind is the main thing, and that is whatever is done with companies, you have to start with asking yourself the question as a company or an organization, are we ready for this journey? And if we're not ready, what do we need to do to get prepared for this journey? Another thing I will say very clearly is there's not enough discussion of this in the boardroom. I've had the pleasure of serving on a couple of corporate boards, and I tell you what, this discussion about diversity and inclusion and using all of our people, all the talents of all of our people, regardless of color, gender, race, creed, whatever, those discussions are not held enough. And too many times that discussion fell on me to bring it up as a topic versus other people on the boards feeling the same way I felt. So the allyship that I think that Lisa talked about earlier needs to increase dramatically, because without board involvement, without senior leadership involvement, so that this culture, that the new culture you want to develop cascades throughout the organization, ultimately these efforts will fail. Without a change of culture, all of these efforts, pipeline, retention, succession, promotion, will fail.
I have to build on what Charles said, because it absolutely starts with behavior, what is acknowledged, what is tolerated, and what is rewarded. And part of that culture, which I totally agree with, is also accountability. I had a CEO say to me, you know, does the organization not know that I care? And I said to him, I was like, but look at who you're surrounding yourself with, right? You know, do you have allies who feel free and they're, you know, they don't have the fear of speaking up? You know, what Charles says about kind of diversity, it goes all the way up through the boardroom, right? So who do you have around the table as well? But it has to start at the top. I always say the CEO is the head of DEI, period, right? Because you have to establish that, and then it has to trickle down. And so if you're not modeling the behavior, then you are sending a signal, not just to the Black and brown folks, but to those that want to be allies. And I just say, you know, it's good business. Yes, it's the right thing to do. And it's an economic and competitive imperative. You have to be proximate to the people that you're serving. And people are paying attention. I like to show my CEOs, there's literally groups that are keeping track of when people make a statement down to the minute. So this notion of I can move and turn things over for COVID, and then all of a sudden say, well, we better take our time when it comes to DEI, it's not going to be acceptable. And so you have to move with the same deliberance and the same metrics and the same commitment to culture change and accountability as we've done to other things. So it's people have seen how organizations can move when there's an imperative, right? And everyone is watching, including stakeholders and customers, et cetera.
Yeah, the smart companies, and building upon what Lisa just said, the most forward-thinking companies or the smart companies look at this whole area as a competitive advantage. You know, that's the old expression of getting my unfair share of talent. Those companies who want their unfair share of talent want people irrespective of their backgrounds, irrespective of their color, irrespective of their race. They want all the talent they can find because they want to be a preferred place to work. So it's a smart business decision. At the end of the day, companies do what they need to do because of business. So if you want your unfair share of talent, DE&I is a perfect way to do it. So I think that's something that needs to be thought about.
Yeah, I think extremely important points there, right? So you need the organization from the top down to embody this idea that diversity and inclusion are number one, two separate things. Diversity is the difference. Inclusion is how you treat them, what their experience is once they're under your umbrella. And that's so very important from the top down because it permeates the entire culture of the organization. So I have a follow-up question on that of asking you, how do you get the CEO, the president, the C-suite, the boardroom to care about these issues, to recognize the value in having the diverse perspective perspectives and talents of a staff come together to really create this competitive advantage of which you speak. Charles, if you'd like to head that off, and I'm sure Lisa will have some thoughts also.
Well, yeah, that's the $64,000 question. I mean, that's the tough one. Unfortunately, leaders or board members or what have you tend to be somewhat reactive. You see what's going on in the broader society now and all the energy around this area. Well, there was some energy around it, but not quite as much as what's been in existence over the last 6 months or so. Okay, so organizations, companies tend to be reactive to what's happening in the broader culture. And so you see all these statements of support for Black Lives Matter and diversity or what have you. Quite frankly, I wish people were more intrinsically motivated to do it without all the external factors, but that's not really the case. So it goes back to whether you have quote unquote woke leaders, whether you have leaders who want to do the right thing, whether you have board members who want to do the right thing, not for philanthropic reasons, but for business reasons. So when you have those forward-thinking organizations to say, hey, we want to be ahead of the curve, we don't want to be behind it, we want to be leaders. And I say this to people and clients all the time. Organizations are just like people. You have leaders, you have followers. So you have the leading organizations, and then you have the following organizations. I give a perfect example. There's a guy by the name of Lawrence Fink, who's chairman of BlackRock. A couple of years ago, he wrote a letter to all of their major investors saying that we are going to start assessing our investments in you if you don't increase the number of women on your boards. And within a year, the percentage of women who were on boards increased dramatically. That was leadership. You got to have leaders who stand up and say, this is the right thing to do. It's not just for philanthropy, it's the right thing to do for our organizations and for our broader society. You also have companies who are talking about stakeholdership now versus just shareholders. And so you have to have leaders who want to, who realize that all of the things that we're talking about have benefit for the entire country, not just for their industry, but for the entire country. And we need more of those leaders to step up.
I would agree and build on what Charles said, which is it's the right thing to do, and there's an economic ROI to doing so. Bringing in people and having them churn is bad for business. The numbers prove that when you have a more diverse organization, a more diverse board, you have better outcomes, right? And as I said, people are looking, there are, especially this new generation, they're activated and they're looking at not just what you do, but how you do it and who is doing it. And in this day and age, everything is visible, right? So there is no gray. In this case, it is very black and white where you stand and how you do things. What I also find is those who are woke, those who are committed, I think the approach to DEI many times is set up to fail, because they will hire someone who may be the head and kind of put them in the box with no power and no money and no influence and no credibility. So I can look at the structure from day one and tell if that's going to be successful or not. So where's the sponsorship and support there? The other is, as my 17-year-old says, do the actions pass the eye roll test? Because there's lots and lots and lots of town hall meetings, lots of yapping. And yes, you do need to talk, but you need to follow that through with actions. And I think what Charles was saying about the example is there's accountability, right? Because what gets measured gets done. And so when the clarity is there, when you can establish some quick wins, then people can either opt into a line behind what the company has established, or they can find another place. But it can't be ambiguous in terms of where you stand and what you're valuing, what you're measuring, and what you're holding people accountable for. And you can't expect it to happen by osmosis, right? There's too much history, too much unconscious bias, and then just people stress the heck out, right? So you have to be very, very, very clear about the behavior, right, in that ecosystem that will be tolerated, rewarded, and encouraged.
So another thing that I think is going to happen, whether older folks like me don't realize it or not, a lot of these young people today are woke. Okay.
And they're not
A lot of
having
these,
it. They
they're
are
not
not
having
having
it.
it.
You know,
My
and I
kids are
give you,
not having it.
I give you a perfect example. After the George Floyd incident, I got a call from a guy that I've known for 30 years, but I hadn't talked to him for probably 25. Okay. Has his own business, very successful in the IT world, very successful. It's a privately held company. He called me all up in arms about the fact that they need to do something because his younger employees, interestingly enough, mostly female and mostly white, they called him a racist because he has like 130 employees in his company rather, and 0 African Americans. Okay. He called me in a tither. Charles, what am I going to do? You need to help me, right? So you have this stuff happening all over the country where these young people are saying enough is enough. You know, they don't have the patience that the older generation had. They just don't. You know, they're used to getting things done and getting them done quickly. Of course, social media has a lot to do with it. But I guess what I'm saying is this issue is not going to go away. So those companies who might be represented on this call or those coaches out there, just know that this is not going to go away. As long as you have these young people rising up against injustice, companies will have to respond because those young people, if they're not happy in the companies they're in, guess what? They're going someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
So companies
do
they do need to put place. I said, what now?
I said, with the quickness, 6.2 jobs, most lasting less than a year. So you are so right, Charles.
Exactly. It's going to happen. It's not going to go away. That's the message. It's not going to go away.
Well, I think that's what's also encouraging because before, again, these problems and the injustice and the inequities and the lack of access is not new for Black and Brown folks. What's new is the awokeness and the genuine allyship. And so that's why there's an urgency of now, because not only, again, do we need it and want it and is it good, but the allies want it and they need it. And so this is an opportunity for companies to take the courage, right, the courageous step to put the right things in place, right, to be more equitable, to be more transparent, to be obvious and visible and clear with the commitment, because that will actually make everything rise. When this all happened, I actually had so many, particularly white men and women, reach out and say, what can I do, right? What can I do? And so you got to be able to harness that. And they're looking to see, do I have a courageous leader or not? Does this organization reflect my values? But they're also trying to figure out how to navigate. So it's like now, it's not next year, it's now. What people have to do both individually as well as a company overall.
And the corporate leadership will continue to be extraordinarily important because there is political pressure against diversity and inclusion efforts. Some of you may know that our president has put a kibosh on diversity and inclusion training within the federal government. That also impacts contractors who have contracts with the federal government. Those folks have to now pass some kind of litmus test, I think is coming from the Department of Justice, to review what kind of diversity and inclusion training they're providing. So I'm saying that to say that the leadership of these organizations will continue to have to step up and say, hey, diversity and inclusion is still important. I don't care what the government says, diversity and inclusion for our company is important now, and it will continue to be, irrespective of what signals come out of the political arena.
Well, and if I can, Zia, just build on that, I find I'm having a lot of conversations with folks that this is not a zero-sum game. It's an and. So you can be intentional and invest in your Black colleagues, But it's not that we don't love you in another employee resource group, or somehow there's not enough of the pie to go around, that if you do this, I'm going to lose, right? This is an and, right? This is a 1 + 1 = 10. And so it's interesting just how deep that, fear of, oh my gosh, if we do this, have I gone too far? Or, or am I going to upset these other groups? And I find a disproportionate amount of my time kind of helping people with that, because it's reality. And yes, there are people who are like, let's move on. Or I had a really interesting exchange with someone who's like, this isn't real, right? This is overblown. And somehow this is a distraction. And so that's where the leadership comes in, but also the articulation of how it's done and where it's done and why it's done. And it's like, I'm taking from you, as someone said, Lisa, aren't you afraid when you pitch landed that, some of the Caucasian managers are going to reject what you're doing? And I was like, no. Let's talk about why this is good for everyone and it's good for business, but it's real, right? And to deny that it's not real is not going to set you on a fruitful path.
Yeah, absolutely, Lisa. Both you and Charles are really, continuing this conversation in the way that it needs to go, because we're talking about some uncomfortable pieces of this, and pieces that maybe people are not necessarily always ready to acknowledge, right? Number one, the youth is leading us. They are super courageous, and they are forcing the rest of us to step into that as well, which I think is so pivotal for moving things forward. If you look back in history here in the US to the 1950s and 60s, those were young people moving and organizing and doing things in the US to kind of really usher in this era of social justice and civil rights for us. And we're still doing a lot of that, and still being led by those young leaders just of this generation that are recognizing that not much is different between the stories that they've heard their grandparents tell about them when they first entered the workplace and what they might be experiencing now. And so I have a follow-up question that really kind of speaks to this. Organizations definitely have to be ready when they embark on this audit, when they really start to discover kind of who they are and how they've been presenting and how they've been relating and connecting to, or not, to Black leaders and to all leaders who might be affected by seeing such things and the experience, right? And a lot of this goes to education and making sure that people understand what a simple statement like Black Lives Matter means and what it doesn't mean. And you feel a lot of apprehension about people sometimes getting behind the statement because they think that it's a broader movement, as opposed to a simple statement that says Black lives are on par with all other lives, as we all should be, as opposed to being higher than or less than, but entitled to the same level of equality and equity and dignity amongst it. And so my question now is to find out, how do organizations listen to those young leaders, to those folks that they have in their pipeline that are screaming out for them to put teeth behind the statements that they make, right? And actions, and not just have the DEI head without any power or influence in the role to affect change throughout the entire organization. How can they listen to those young leaders? And what are some of the things that they might hear from these people as they chat with them? Charles?
Well, I don't think it's anything, some static here, but I don't think it's anything revolutionary. I just think it's a time, it's an opportunity to give people a chance to voice their concerns, their beliefs, their suggestions in a safe environment. I don't want to say focus groups or whatever, but just have the platform for people to have conversations with one another. One of the things I was thinking about, we were talking at a pretty high level, appropriately so, with this topic. But I think it's the organizations have to find a way to allow people to develop relationships, okay? Because at the end of the day, change takes place because of trusting relationships. So if there's a way for organizations to bring people of different races, backgrounds, creeds, genders, et cetera, whatever that looks like for that particular organization, to have those quote unquote safe conversations with one another. We don't, there's so much political animus and, so much political correctness, because I'm not sure if I can say this to this person, or I'm not sure if this person is the right person to talk to. I mean, we're going through all of these changes mentally. Companies have to figure out a way to give people a chance to, as I said, build those trusting relationships so that they can get a sense of what people are really feeling, what they're really thinking. I look at this from a very personal perspective. I've been on, as I said, been a CEO, been on a lot of boards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I can count on one hand the number of times somebody has just asked me about me personally, not business, not nothing to do with business, but just me personally. You know, my family. I have a daughter and 2 grandkids. I can count on one hand the number of times in these hundreds of board meetings I've been in that somebody has had, Charles, how's your family? How are your grandkids? What do you do? What do you do when you're not working? What are some of your hobbies? See, we don't spend enough time getting to know each other as human beings. And so I think that that would help to some extent. It's not going to solve all the problems, but we got to figure out a way to build relationships of trust across barriers. I guess across races, across cultures. And once people know that I pretty much have the same values you have, we can work on bigger projects. We can work on bigger issues because there's a trusting relationship that's been built. So I just come at it from a little different angle in terms of the human angle that we haven't spent enough time building over time.
So I would absolutely build on that and just double down on this notion of safe spaces, because, you know, who's in the room matters, but it can't just be a room and the only conversation with the Black folks, because it does have impact outside. But the caution I would have is one of speed, because a lot of times, to me, this is a very short study. You all know, right, what is going on and what's happening and what's not happening in your organization. You may not want to acknowledge it, but you know. So you want to hear the experience. You want to add to the knowledge, again, not burden those who are already burdened with your history and context. What they can tell you is what the experience is like and what the culture is like and what they have seen in their journey at that organization. But you have to quickly move to action, right? Because once it's said, there's an expectation set there. Right. And at the end of the day, as someone said to me, you know, people are fatiguing of what we're doing. Well, they're fatiguing because they don't see an outcome. They're fatiguing because you haven't made it personal in terms of how it's going to impact and how things are going to sustainably get better. And so there needs to be some urgency and some priority around this and some deliberate action attached to it. But Charles is right, the messenger matters, right? If you're someone who's done egregious things in the past, and then you're now the face of it, it's just not going to be credible. So that safety is important, that credibility is important, but the follow through and the speed is just as important, because we've seen this play before. It's like these false starts, or we're going to do unconscious bias training and now we're good, right? And maybe we'll talk about microaggressions and now we're good. That ain't enough, right? That is just the beginning. Now it is, what is the plan that's going to give me what everybody else wants? Opportunity, respect, safety, right? The ability to grow, right? These are human needs. Everyone wants, you know, not just Black people, everybody wants this. It's just that we disproportionately are not having the access and the investment and the sponsorship.
I think that's very, very important. It reminds me of a poem that I mentioned on our Juneteenth call, and it was actually by Paul Laurence Dunbar. It's called "We Wear the Mask." And the first line of "We Wear the Mask" says, "We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes." And so it really does feel like now is the time to stop hiding ourselves, to remove the mask, all of us, and look at this problem holistically and think about what we can all do. I think Charles mentioned something, and so did you, Lisa. You know, whose responsibility is this in an organization? Is it only the CEOs? You know, who should really be speaking to this and creating kind of those safe spaces and those abilities to create access and pipelines for opportunity? Whose responsibility is this in an organization?
Well, I would say, as I said, it starts at the top, but each individual has got to call something when they see it, right? If you're in a meeting and there's bad behavior going on or people being talked over, an individual also is part of the culture, right? Culture doesn't reside in the hands of one or two people. It's permeated throughout the organization. So who are you when you see these things happening? When you are bringing folks in, how are you investing? It starts at the top because that sets the tone, but it has to be the responsibility of everyone, because someone today may be you tomorrow. And so it's got to be kind of what are the rules of engagement in a particular organization or corporate ecosystem versus somebody else has got it and I can remain silent. You can't remain silent. You have to be activated. I sit on boards similar to Charles, and what I say is you got to lean in, get off of your heels and lean forward and be activated in terms of what you can influence and do differently.
Yeah, and I would agree 100%. I think what it calls for, and I know we have a lot of coaches on the call, what it calls for is us as coaches to encourage people to have more courage. Okay, there's not enough courage in organizations. There's not enough people saying this is what. There are not enough points of view. You know, there are too many people who are followers instead of leaders. And at the end of the day, organizations do respect people who have points of view. And so I would encourage us in our work with our clients individually on groups or whatever, to have people stand up. What do you really believe? Okay. And be comfortable speaking about what you truly believe. Now, it helps if this person is a good performer at the end of the day. It does help because they'll be listened to more because they're a good performer to start with. But I would encourage all of us to encourage the people we work with to have more courage, to have points of view. And I think I think organizations will respect that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And so leading up to that, I'd love to, really kind of start to close us out here. We're starting to near the end of our time, but I'd like to pose a question and give you guys a little bit of time to answer, because I really want people who are listening, whether they be coaches or organizations thinking about this for the first time or reevaluating what they're already doing, to leave here with maybe a couple of tangible thoughts that they can take with them. So I'd love to ask Charles and then Lisa, if you could give me a couple of tangible things that organizations should continue to do to awaken their support for Black leaders and how that might benefit the organization overall.
One of the things, and I was thinking about this earlier today, I think one of the things is to provide an audience. And what I mean by that is we talked a lot about the leadership, and cascading, cascading influence downward. I think at the end of the day, we can't get away from that. And so I think it's important for leaders in organizations, executive leadership teams, CEOs, boards to provide an audience for non-traditional people. Now, what do I mean by that? Non-traditional in terms of level. See, what gets lost oftentimes is that I'm at the top of an organization. I really don't know what people down in the bowels of the organization are really going through or really thinking. And there's so many different levels to the hierarchy that I don't hear about that kind of stuff. So I think it's important, if I'm a leader of an organization, to give voice and give audience to those people throughout the organization so I can get the real story about what they're really experiencing and incorporate that into how I shape the culture of my organization. So if I were to say something I think is relatively practical and easy to do, is to get feedback, encourage feedback, reach out to people throughout the organization at multiple levels, not just once a year, but on a regular basis, to get a sense of what people are truly, truly, truly experiencing, and get rid of the filter of I call it the filter of the hierarchy. Because when you're a CEO, oftentimes you're the last one to know what's really going on. And so you got to flip the script, so to speak, and say, hey, I'm not going through all this formal stuff. I want to speak to frontline supervisors. I want to speak to managers. I want to speak to directors. I want to speak to VPs. I want to speak to everybody all along the way, and not just get feedback from my ELT or my senior leadership team. That's something I think that would be very important to do.
So I'll add on that and say a few things, which is share the work and act, right? Be a powerful and courageous ally, even if you're afraid of making a mistake. Because I hear so many, it's like, I want to do, but I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. You know, someone said, I don't want to end up on social media. It's like, have the courage to act and create the forum. The other is put the emphasis where it matters, right? When you think about people in the company, visibility, promotion, opportunity, amplification, support, resources, all of those things that matter to someone's success. Implement the right structure, right? So yes, you have, you know, the leader as the head of DEI, but are you looking at everything else, like diverse panels, like pay equity, like enhancing the culture? Who are you putting forward even in your advertisement, right? How are you showing up that says from, you know, soup to nuts, we're down and we are focused on it. And then, as I said, look at the numbers without excuses. What is your dashboard? What are you measuring? I'm on one board where they bury the numbers way, way, way in the back, and you need a forensic scientist just to figure out what is going on. What is the 1, 2, or 3 KPIs? Because that's all that really matters, that everyone is aware of, that is visible, that you're going to measure yourself and hold yourself accountable. And when all else fails, just have a little humanity, right? Have a little humanity. Someone said to me, if you haven't had your heart broken over the last 7 months, then you're not getting it, right? So at the end of the day, this is about how do we treat each other? What are our values? What are our missions? And how do all of those things align?
Yes, because this whole effort we're talking about cannot be, and Lisa has kind of talked about this, it cannot be an appendage. See, too often this has been an appendage. It's been a bolt on to the organization instead of being institutionalized or integrated throughout the fabric of the organization. Do not have DE&I as an appendage. It has to be integrated into the daily fabric of how the organization does business. If it's an appendage, it will not work. It will fail because it will be viewed as a program instead of a priority. This has to be a priority, not a program.
I truly can't thank the two of you enough for really laying bare the issues and then also some very simple yet courageous solutions for this. We're not going to solve it here on this call. Unfortunately, I would love to add that to my repertoire, and Brian would be very excited if I was able to do that for the world, but it's not possible. But sparking this very critical conversation is. And so it reminds me of simply an article that I just read by the Society of Human Resources Management, which was entitled 7 Ways to Support Black Employees. And I'm very comforted to say that you guys took all of those things and then went beyond with providing extra value. You mentioned things like reaching out to Black employees, hearing from them, providing some supplemental support options, putting teeth behind the statements on racial justice and inequality and equity, putting teeth behind it, not just putting in the position ahead of DEI, but also making sure that that person has the ability to affect change and the ear of those who that person would need to speak with in order to make that culture shift in an organization. And then making sure that you examine the organization behind the scenes, the real deep dive, the one that maybe you're a little afraid to do, but is necessary to not just to your survival, but to your competitive advantage, to know what's happening within your own organization, and to be able to address it, to be able to confront it, developing that new hiring plan, finding out where those policies that you have in place might not be as inclusive as you might like them to be. And so I just thank you both for really contributing to what we all know will be a continued conversation for some time. But as Charles said, it shouldn't be an appendage. It's a conversation that should be carried forth with actionable steps to get us to another side of this. And so I thank you again. And I have to turn it over to Brian, who will leave us with some closing words. But thank you for adding to the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate Lisa carrying me. She carried me the whole way.
Like this, you and me, Charles.
I made a friend connection, and I'm very happy to have done that.
Yeah, I do see questions in the chat box. Manisha may have some questions too, so I do. Maybe we can entertain if there are some from our audience, perhaps.
Yes, lots of comments. I was just soaking it all in. This is, given my own intersectional experience and also as an immigrant and as a person of color, this has been a very difficult time for me. And so, hearing a lot of what you've shared, everything resonated with me. And I'm seeing a lot of I see some comments from Leah, especially around young people being activated and being engaged and asking questions and wanting action. And then both of us, we kind of commented at the same time. And something that struck me was, Zia, your comment about how in the 60s, it was again the young people. And I had not thought of that way before, and it makes a lot of sense. I did see a comment here from Vihan, who says, whose responsibility is it? Well, I believe it's the culture and values of an organization, which is built and reinforced by its leadership. So I don't know if you had any comments or anything to add to that.
I would agree. And when the values and the mission are clear, then new people who are entering the organization, they know what they're signing up for, right? And so it's when it moves and when it's, not reinforced, from the top to the bottom, then that's where you get breakage. And so that clarity and that reinforcement and that action matching the words is really important, because then again, people opt in, right? They opt in, and in general, they normally do things in their own best self-interest. It's when you have gaps that you see things that can go awry, but everyone has ownership.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree, Lisa. Charles, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't think so. I think, as we have all talked about, we need to make this thing a plan. You think about organizations, there's a plan for everything. A business plan, a strategic plan, all of these plans. All organizations have plans for everything, and dashboards that go along with those plans to see if they're doing what they said they were going to do. Again, don't make it an appendage, make it a priority. If it's a priority, come up with a plan that has accountability and assignments relative to who's going to do what, by when, just like we all do in organizations. And if you have that, then you'll have a chance to move the needle. If you don't have a plan, if you don't have accountability built into the plan, if you don't have assignments as to who's going to do what, it'll fade away just like a cloud.
Couldn't agree more. Making DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion a part of core business strategy, as opposed to just an add-on that's somehow only HR's responsibility. So absolutely, couldn't agree with you more. I'm just going to take one quick look to see if there are any other questions. I'm also checking the QA box. There's none in the QA box. A lot of comments, it resonates with a lot of us. And Brian, thank you for sharing the SHRM article link. I'll save the chat as well and share it back with the Coacharya team if there's a way to put it up on the website. Lots of great resources here as well. Well, that's all I had, and thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us today on this all-important topic. Your words were, I think, to me personally, if I can speak for myself, very inspiring, and there's a strong bias for action and not just talk. So really tangible tips towards the end. Really, really appreciate that. And Brian and Zia, did you have anything to add as we close out?
I will thank everyone for coming. I'm really thrilled that we got a chance to do this, and even more so that we got to record this. So I was enjoying this conversation so much that I kept double checking that the record button was on, because I want to make sure that I know it's going to be on your website, and maybe we'll be able to share it beyond that too. Because this was a really, really useful conversation. I was going to also add, because there were so many times I wanted to say something. Charles and I both coach at Dell, and we were together number of years ago, and you maybe remember this, Charles, where they showed us some of what they were doing in the D, E, and I category, and space for them. And they have a committee for diversity and inclusion that Michael Dell himself sits on. This is not something he just says he supports, but he's actually taking his time and being on this particular committee. Here's whatever, one of the world's richest men and company named after him and so forth. And they take that very seriously. And we were talking earlier about the support of the CEO. The CEO is the head of diversity, and that's just an incredible example of that. So thank you, for having us, Coacharya. We really appreciate our time here. I'm really excited for having more of these types of dialogues. So poor Zia, because when she and I first sort of thought about this, I don't know, I think she enjoys doing this because she's fantastic at it. At Coach Source, we'd like to keep having conversations like this because we think it really helps at least move the needle to some extent. Coaches are very well positioned as people to help leaders grow and expand their view and make important changes. So thank you all for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Thank you, everyone.
Charles,
Thank
Lisa, Zia, and Brian. And I put in the link to the LinkedIn group. Please join the group and we can keep the conversations going. That's a group specific to the Awake, Aware, Arise conference. I've just put the link in the chat window as well. So once again, thank you very much, all of you, and have a great rest of your day. And thank you to the attendees. And we have a couple of more sessions in the conference ends tomorrow. So look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
all.
very much.
Bye.
Bye now.